Chapter 60 Dragons. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. Eisen stood in front of the gold dragon that just put him through that sudden test and waited for something else to happen. The first test, as it was called in the notifications, was now over, but who could tell if the dragon would just start the second test instantly afterward. And if it would be harder than the first one, Eisen wasn't sure if he could survive it. But to his luck, what the dragon did next wasn't some kind of attack. Instead, it simply began to laugh. Good, good. So you did what I asked you to. You came a bit earlier than I expected, so I thought you didn't reach the goal yet, but apparently everything went well after all. It said in a deep voice that echoed through the hall they were currently in, and Eisen looked up at the dragon and chuckled slightly. So you were that kid I saw in the inn. Seems like you grew a little bit in those few weeks yourself. BL.net. You could see it that way, yes, but it's rather different, dear Eisen. The dragon said and bared its teeth in a smile before steam started to rise from its body, completely enveloping it, before it completely disappeared in what seemed like an instant, as if a strong wind simply blew it away in all directions. What Eisen could see then wasn't the dragon anymore, but instead the cat that he saw on his first day in the game. Oh. So you're able to transform. Eisen said with excitement in his eyes as he looked at the golden cat as it climbed onto one of the mountains of treasure to get on level with him. Indeed I am. I had expected you to be more surprised, as others that I have met in the past were. But what else can I expect from someone that so easily passed my first test? And I do apologize for that. It was simply a way to test whether or not you followed what I asked you to. I thank you for that. The dragon in the form of a cat slightly bowed its head down, while a notification popped up in front of him. Quest successful. A mysterious cat's request. Description: you found yourself in your dreamscape after being called there by an ancient being whose identity you do not know. He requested for you to come to see him within a month after developing your body. You don't know what will happen if you don't follow his request, but you don't want to find out either. Requirements: get all of your base attributes, STR, END, AGI, INT, WS, to at least 100. Reward: you are allowed to take the Ancient Gold Dragon's second test. Failure: not appearing by the end of the time limit, you will never be able to take any of the Ancient Dragon's tests. Not passing the Ancient Gold Dragon's test, you will not be allowed to take the Ancient Gold Dragon's tests anymore. Time limit: 1 month, of course. How could I not do this for someone that literally visited me in my dream? Although, you seem to know my name, but what is yours? Eisen asked, and the dragon in front of him seemed to chuckle lowly. Excuse my rudeness. My name is Aelrentirth, but in the past, most humans, dwarves, or others of your races have taken to call me Aelren, as it seems easier to pronounce in a conversation. The dragon explained, and Eisen nodded. I see, then I hope you won't mind if I do so as well, Aelren. Now, was the reason you called me here simply for that test? Eisen asked, and Aelren shook his head, before he jumped from the pile of treasures and steam rose from his body and enveloped him and the space up to 2 meters above him, before instantly disappearing again, leaving in its stead a simple old man, wearing a somewhat decorated yellow robe. His hair was completely white and reached to beyond his shoulders, and his beard was quite long itself. His eyes were golden in color, and his ears were slightly pointed, albeit not like those of an elf. Shall we take a seat and talk about it over tea? Aelren asked and moved along one of the paths between the mountains of gold, gems and pearls and was followed by Eisen until they reached a small open spot with a golden table and 2 chairs in the middle. After Aelren sat down on one of the chairs and waved to the other for Eisen to sit on, the old man did as suggested and sat down at the table. He placed his backpack onto the ground and grabbed Korea from inside to make sure she was all right after the test, since especially that gas might have affected her as well. But luckily, it seemed like she was completely all right, although a little bit scared and confused by the situation. He placed her down on the table, and she leaned against his hand while trying to hide from Aelren. And who would that be? The ancient dragon in human asked with a smile while pouring Eisen some tea from a pot that was standing on the table. Ah, this is Korea. She's a myconid that I tamed. I hope you don't mind that I brought her. Aizen explained, and Aelren smiled in response while looking at Korea. Don't worry about it. I wouldn't have wanted you to simply bring another person with you without my approval, but I can't say anything against a tamed creature. After all, taming is a sort of soul connection. I'm surprised, though. Myconids are supposed to be hard to tame. How did it come to this? Aelren asked curiously, and Aizen began to explain. That's quite simple, really. A friend of mine found an egg on a journey, and then we coincidentally met while I was out to get stronger. I made him a new weapon, and in return he gave me the egg that he found, which only yesterday hatched. And the result of that is Korea here. Aha, that's quite interesting, then. But even then, a myconid would be hard to tame. I guess that just shows that she felt you were kind. But now, shall we get to my reasons for calling you here? I am pretty curious, yeah. Aizen chuckled lowly and took a sip from the tea that Aelren gave him. In response, he smiled lightly. Then I won't let you wait. First, what do you know about dragons? I noticed that you seem to have lost your experience when we met for the first time, so you probably don't know too much about this world and its history, am I wrong? No, you're right. I really don't know much. I heard a few small stories here and there, for example about how the dwarven country came to be, or smaller legends about different things. But no, I don't know anything about dragons, sorry. Aizen explained. The dragon nodded in response, as if having expected such an answer. Alright, then I'll explain to you the basics. There are two main factions of us pure dragons. The chromatic dragons, and the metallic dragons. The chromatic dragons are usually evil, although they are still somewhat split amongst them. Some just enjoy death and destruction, while others still follow their own wicked rules. There are 5 main colors to them: black, red, blue, green and white. Us metallic dragons are usually good, although some are still more chaotic than others. I myself try to keep to a certain set of rules. And there are 5 metals that we keep to: gold, bronze, brass, silver and copper. Of course there are still other dragon types, but those usually aren't pure-blooded. I see, that's quite interesting. And I do have to say, your scales do really have a cunning similarity to gold. Aizen chuckled lowly. Thank you. I take quite some pride in them. Anyway, there are 2 deities that share control over the faith of dragonkind. Evil dragons worship Tiamat the Dragon Queen, while good dragons worship Bahamut the Platinum Dragon. You could say that these 2 factions are waging war against each other. And for that, we dragons choose champions, so to say. Strong warriors, or skilled craftsmen, either is fine considering that in a war, both can be seen as equally important. A warrior won't be able to show their true worth without a weapon of their level, and it doesn't matter how many weapons a craftsman makes without anyone to wield them. You were chosen as one of those champions. When you inspected me, I did the same in return and saw that peculiar title you have, Original of the Mechanical Arts. It seems to be a completely unique, unknown title, so I was sure you would end up useful. Then thank you for choosing me for such an important role. But without that title, you wouldn't have chosen me. Then how are others chosen as a champion? That is not completely right. I chose you as a champion without you showing your true worth, since through it I knew that you would be useful either way. But even without such a title, if one of us ancient dragons takes a liking to you, you can be chosen as a champion by any of them. Aelren explained while holding his teacup in both of his hands, every once in a while taking sips from it. The dragon smiled and continued. But even then, I can't just make you a champion without knowing you are truly worth it. That's why us dragons test potential champions. Usually, as a starter we give them an unspoken test, something to test their character. We give them a goal that might seem hard to reach. In your case, it was to get your stats from their lowest possible state over their first big hurdle. That way we can see if the potential champion will give up in the face of hardships. And then, just now, I gave you the first real test. It was simply to truly test the condition of your stats, and how you got used to them. I used my fearful presence to test the strength of your mind, presented through your intelligence and wisdom stats. Then, I shot my fire breath at you, to test your agility. And at last, I used my weakening breath on you to test your strength and endurance. The giant, dwarf halfling nodded in understanding while leaning back in his chair. If it was like that, then he was curious what the other tests would be like. So after I pass all of your tests, I'll officially be one of your champions. Yes, you will be. At least you will be partially so. To be a true champion, you have to be accepted by 5 different ancient dragons, each of a yet different metal. So once you become my champion, to truly be accepted as a champion that can fight or support our faction, you have to be accepted by ancient brass, bronze, copper and silver dragons. What their tests are depends on them, but they should at least be somewhat in your area of expertise. But for now, we should continue my tests. Alright. I was actually wondering what those tests are, Aelren. Eisen explained after finishing his cup of tea, and Aelren stood up and waved at Eisen to follow him. He picked Kuria up and placed her on his shoulder, before standing up and running after the ancient dragon. They reached the wall which had a door big enough for Eisen to pass through, but not a dragon in its regular size, and Aelren turned to Eisen and began to talk. My first test was one that tested your raw physical and mental capabilities. The second test I will give to you will be one that will test your skill. Of course, it's not about looking at your pure skill ranks and levels, but about what you can actually do. Since you are based around crafting, that's what you will be doing. What you make is up to you, and I will supply you with whatever material you need, as long as it is within my realm of possibility. However, be aware that I am expecting something that fully displays all areas of your expertise. For example, a simple sword will not be enough. Try to impress me. Aelren said while opening the door, revealing a room in which Eisen could find a multitude of things. Different worktables with a number of different tools and materials, as well as everything a fully functional smithy needed, meaning an anvil, forge, and even a smeltery. Work hard, you have as much time as you need. Hours, days, weeks, it doesn't matter. As long as you are working, that is. There is another room for you to sleep further in the back, and I will bring you food and something to drink whenever you need it. New quest. Ancient Gold Dragon's second test. Description: after passing the Ancient Gold Dragon Aeronturtha's first test, you now have to take his second test. For that, he asked you to make something great to impress him. As long as you work diligently and do not abuse his hospitality, there is no time limit. Reward: you will be allowed to take the Ancient Gold Dragon's third test. Failure: you will never be allowed to take another Ancient Gold Dragon's test. Time limit: none. Eisen, race. Giant, dwarf halfling, occupation. Omni Craftsmaster, level. 71, HP. 1821, MP. 1821, STR. 101, End. 101, AGI. 101, Int. 100, Wis. 101, Cha. 10, Titles: Casanova, Original of the Mechanical Arts, Limit Breaker V, Skills, A Dwarf's Hands, Rank. 2, Level. 28, A Giant's Strength, Rank. 2, Level. 28, Alchemy, Rank. 2, Level. 18, Appraisal, Rank. 1, Level. 7, Blacksmithing, Rank. 1, Level. 61, Cooking, Rank. 0, Level. 68, Crafting Space, Rank. 0, Level. 51, Drawing, Rank. 1, Level. 6, Enchanting, Rank. 1, Level. 41, Flame of the Earth Magic, rank 1, level 51, Golmancy, rank 0, level 1, Leatherworking, rank 2, level 4, Lockpicking, rank 0, level 1, Mana Copy, rank 1, level 4, Mana Double, rank 2, level 46, Mana Manipulation, rank 2, level 32, Swordsmanship, rank 2, level 74, Tailoring, rank 2, level 6, Taming, rank 0, level 11, Tool Connection, rank 1, level 10, Woodworking, rank 0, level 49. Chapter 61 Automaton. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Eisen stepped through the door and took a closer look around. All of the equipment he could find was quite high quality, same for the materials. He couldn't really find any problems with the fabrics, leather, or metals that were displayed on the work tables. However, Eisen felt slightly unsure about a few things, so he turned around and looked at Aelren. First off, how did you get all of this? You yourself don't strike me to be a craftsman. Eisen said, and Aelren chuckled with a nod. Yes, you are right. This place once used to be the hideout of a craftsman. Only about 300 years ago was it that I took over here, and of course expanded upon the space so that I could move without trouble. I cleaned up a little bit and prepared these materials when I figured out that you would probably come here after all. I see, thank you then, Aelren. And I know this might seem rude considering that you did prepare a lot of good items and materials, but would it be alright if I went back to Melro for about a day, simply to get all that I need? I have my tools down there, and there are a few things I would like to prepare for what I'll be making. Eisen explained, and Aelren ran his fingers through his beard before nodding. That's fine with me. This is to test how high your abilities can reach, so it only makes sense to allow for a good base situation. I can bring you down the mountain quickly, and I hope you don't mind if I follow you around to make sure you're not slacking off. The dragon smiled and pointed toward the exit. Shall we go right now? Eisen nodded and followed Aelren outside the large treasure-filled hall, through the mist room, and then through the tunnels leading to the cave entrance. When they got outside, steam rose from Aelren's body and formed a huge sphere, which dissipated immediately and revealed Aelren's true dragon form. Climb onto my back, and make sure you hold on tightly, or else you will probably fall off. Aelren chuckled and Eisen nodded with a soft laugh from himself. He placed Kuria into his backpack to make sure she wouldn't accidentally fall off during flight, and then climbed onto the gold dragon's back. There wasn't really a good place to hold on to, but it seemed like that didn't really matter too much and the game supported him and made sure that he wouldn't fall off. Of course that only worked with Eisen actually trying to do his best to hold on by himself. A few seconds after Eisen got in a position where he could properly hold on, Aelren prepared to take off. The wings created a huge gust of wind that forced Eisen to close his eyes on its own, and when Aelren actually took off, the wind only became far stronger, obviously. Eisen closed his eyes tightly and gripped onto Aelren's scales as tightly as possible. And soon enough, Eisen felt completely weightless and his body was slowly being pulled from the dragon's back. Slowly, he tried to open his eyes and saw the ground approaching quicker and quicker, albeit through a layer of mist, which Aelren probably used to hide himself whenever he decided to fly this close to Melro. It was truly a beautiful sight. The sun was slowly setting, so the whole world seemed to be illuminated in a soft red light. This was something that you couldn't easily get in real life, and Eisen appreciated this fully. But it didn't take long until Aelren reached the ground, as he was in a complete dive while flying downward. He landed a bit outside of town in the forest so they would be hidden from the townfolk, and Eisen quickly jumped down from the dragon's back, just before he turned into another form that was easier to walk around in. The cat form. Now, I hope you don't mind if I follow you like this. This way I don't need to worry about people trying to talk to me. The dragon, Cat explained and jumped onto Aizen's shoulder after the old man got Kuria out of the backpack, and placed her on his other shoulder. That's fine with me, I guess. Now, I'll have to go see my friend and get some things from her. Can I tell her about you, or should I keep who you really are secret? Aizen asked while starting to walk toward town, mentally making a checklist for what he would need other than his tools. If you trust her, then you can tell her. You can have her help with whatever you need to get as well, however, she is not allowed to assist you with your work. After all, it's your test, not hers. Yeah, I kind of expected that. Well, it's fine. At least she won't worry, since I can just tell her now that I won't be back for a while. What I'm planning is going to take a while, after all. Aizen chuckled lowly and began to clench his fist at excitement. If his idea would really work, then it would be something that he's dreamt of a really long time. And something that he promised an old friend to create someday. He would try and create a fully functional, living automaton. So, do you have everything that you need now? Aelren asked Aizen when he placed all the materials, tools and clothes that he would need into a crate. Yes, mostly so. You said you would give me whatever material that I would need, right? Aizen asked while double-checking everything, while Bree was in the background playing with Kuria. They had met up shortly after Aizen and Aelren entered Melro, and Aizen explained the whole situation to her. Of course, at first she wanted to bring Aizen to bring her, but once he explained that it wouldn't be possible, she gave in after all. I will do my best to acquire the best materials you can use. It may take some time, though, depending on what it is that you may need. The dragon in cat form explained, and then looked down into the crate. That is a quite unique assessment of items, though. There are quite a number of different professions involved, it seems. Well, I'm supposed to make something to the extent of all my abilities, after all. Aizen chuckled and nodded while closing down the crate, before he turned around and looked at the pink-haired Fae, kin behind him. Bree, I'll be going now, alright. I don't know how long I'll be gone, though, sorry, oh. That's fine. But if there's any way I can help from down here, just let me know. She exclaimed and brought Kuria back over to Aizen, setting her down on top of the crate. I will, thank you. See you soon. Aizen smiled and then he left for the forest again. While he was in town briefly, he went to a few different places to get all the tools that he might need, as well as some simple explanations for specific skill abilities and special materials to use during the creation of his automaton. Once more, Aelren turned into his dragon form and flew Aizen up the mountain to the platform in front of the cave entrance. They walked through the cave system and Aizen entered the workshop once more. Before he would get to work, he would need to ask Aelren for something, though. Would it be possible for you to bring me the corpse of a wolf? It should be as intact as possible, meaning that all the bones should be there, most muscle tissue should be intact, and so on. Aizen asked, and Aelren looked through the small door while still in his dragon form. Of course, don't worry. I'll bring it to you as soon as I can. Now, how about you start making preparations already? Aelren suggested, and Aizen nodded in response. While Aelren was now gone to get what Aizen asked him to, Aizen himself grabbed a few mana crystals. First, it was time to get his enchantment skill up to rank 2, so that he could unlock ability enchantment. One after another, Aizen repeatedly created different enchantments that could complete simple tasks in a complicated way, to give him as much experience as possible. He made mana crystals that were able to vibrate in different strength, float a foot above the ground, or would simply independently roll around in a straight line. He did this multiple times, until Aizen finally managed to rank his enchantment skill up to 2 within 1.5 hours, allowing him to finally work on the core part of the automata. Before starting to work, Aizen set up his crafting space for alchemy, and then set up the alchemy distillation system that he bought at Moram's place and got out the 2 special crystals that would allow to give a golem core, mind, and soul, as well as the mana crystal that he ripped out of the Goblin King's chest. Since he knew that Moram was only planning to sell his portion of his mana crystals anyway, Eisen left him the proper amount of mana crystals needed to make up for the king's after asking Bree how much a rank 4 field boss mana crystal would be worth. The old man cracked his knuckles and placed the large mana crystal into the mithril mortar, before crushing it up with the mithril pestle after infusing both of them with his mana. After he turned the mana crystal into a fine powder, he poured it into an extra bowl and then placed the next crystal into it and ground it down, before then doing the same for the last of the 3 crystals. He poured some water into the bowl and mixed the 3 crystal powders into it, before pouring the mixture into the glass flask he would use. Eisen lit the mana crystal with the flame enchantment up and placed it under the flask, connecting the distillation system to the setup. It didn't take long until all the water evaporated and what was left was a simple, pure white crystal growth. Eisen grabbed it out of the flask and quickly activated his transmutation to form it into a sphere, that ended up being slightly larger than both his fists combined. But that wasn't all that Eisen did to the crystal. After all, to properly push it to the highest heights that he could with his current abilities, he had to make sure that the golem core would later break through his skill. He already hoped that using a rank 4 mana crystal would help with that, but he couldn't be completely sure, so he did all he could to ensure this. Eisen used transmutation to carve runes into the crystal. While he was in town just now, Moram explained to him that the runes you could use in enchantment could also be used in other ways, and what Eisen decided to do was to give the crystal ball the ability store knowledge, meaning that it could grow through experience, albeit not the literal experience that would heighten the automaton stats. Now that he could use ability enchantment, it was indeed possible for him to use parts of his own abilities, but growth through experience was something that was deeply embedded within one's soul, so his enchantment rank would need to grow further for that, but for now it would at least be possible to let the automaton truly understand his body, and let it learn how to use it. For that, Eisen would use a gem that he found while hunting with Juk and Bree. The Beast Gem. Eisen asked Juk if he was interested in it, but as it seemed like it would only make it possible for tamers have better control over their beasts or monsters, Juk said that Eisen could keep it. He wanted to truly build up a connection with his beasts, and such a gem would only make it fake. But apparently, the way that the beast gem technically worked, was that it created something like a fake beast to the tamed beast's eyes that they would submit to. For that, it basically collected information on how a specific beast moved, acted, and reacted, and used it against them. And Eisen would use just that function to let the golem automaton grow to act like a real living being would. In order to let the golem core use the gem's function, Eisen simply carved the runes he needed with transmutation, and then filled them out with the emerald-green gem. Once Eisen could be sure that the runic gem pattern would hold, Eisen hardened the whole crystal sphere using transmutation, finishing the physical base for the golem core. Chapter 62 Beast Golem Core. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. After the base for the golem core was finished, Eisen decided to start working on the enchantments needed for it. But since he would first need to figure out how ability enchantment worked, and didn't want to experiment on the crystal base for the core since he might accidentally ruin it, Eisen decided to first grab a few smaller mana crystals and try some things out. Eisen opened his status page and looked at his different skills to see what he could use, and the first thing that he thought might be interesting was his appraisal skill. Maybe it was possible to create a lens that could independently scan things and show what they were. Curious at what that might be like, Eisen decided to go for that. The easiest way for now would probably be something like a monocle. Having that image in mind, Eisen turned one of the mana crystals into a small and thin circular plate, which he made sure to be thin enough in the center so that he could look through it. It wasn't perfectly clear, and the sight was still somewhat distorted, but at least it was good enough to practice with. After that, Eisen changed his crafting space from alchemy to enchanting, and began to think about the process of ability enchanting. For that, he could either use the same type of marbles that Moram used before when enchanting the Na crystals for Bree's dress, or he could try to enchant the mana crystal monocle directly. The first of those ways would make the enchantment a lot more stable and strong, and the second would simply make it easier to enchant something, but there was a higher risk of failure, and usually the enchantments were weaker this way. That meant that the best way for Eisen to practice ability enchantment would be to use it on one of the marbles, and then transfer it over to the mana crystal monocle. This way he could practice enchanting something in this way, the marble, and at the same time learn how to transfer the enchantment from the marble to a mana crystal. So, Eisen grabbed the bag filled with the pure white marbles and held it in his hand. According to Moram's explanation, he had to use his mana and pour it into the marble, then try to convert it to the essence of a skill. It was supposed to be somewhat similar to infusing your mana with an element, but at the same time different. So, Eisen did just that. He poured his mana into the marble and concentrated on his appraisal skill. He had one image in mind, and that was the effect that his skill had. When he looked at something, he saw its information. That's all that crossed his mind at that moment, and after having a stable image, Eisen concentrated that thought into a single spot, the small marble in his hand where his mana was currently at. When he opened his eyes again, the pure white sphere turned into a soft yellow like a lightly bleached out version of dandelion yellow. After this was done, Eisen manipulated the now infused mana inside the marble and tried to move it over into the mana crystal monocle. When he did so, the marble turned into yellow particles that were absorbed by the crystal, turning it into a light yellow shade as well. Once it was done, he checked the item status. Appraisal lens, quality. Perfect, rank. 2. Description, a thin mana crystal lens that has been enchanted to show functions of the appraisal skill. While the enchantment itself is of rank 2, since the enchanter's appraisal skill was at 1 at the time of creation, it is only able to display information equivalent to a rank 1 appraisal skill, but has a lower mana requirement on use. It will not increase the appraisal skill's proficiency on use. Effect, displays information equivalent to using a rank 1 appraisal skill in exchange for mana. Alright, that worked, then. Eisen said with a soft chuckle and placed the monocle over his eye. Nothing happened just yet, but he tried to look around and then saw Kuria playing with one of the enchanting marbles, and thought that she might be a good target. Myconid hatchling, sounds about right, yeah. Maybe I should level my appraisal skill up further. Might be something good to sell to beginner players when they start. It doesn't seem to drain that much mana either. The old man muttered to himself. It wasn't really a great item, and there wasn't anything special about it, but at least it was good practice for the golem core. The process of enchanting like that was far more intuitive than Eisen expected, so it wouldn't be hard to put the necessary enchantments onto the golem core. So, Eisen grabbed the sphere as well as 3 of the pure white marbles and began to work. One after another, he would prepare the 3 enchantments. They might be somewhat harder to imagine, considering how they aren't specific skill references but rather basic ability references, but Eisen tried anyway. He first grabbed one of the marbles and imagined the feeling of controlling your body. The way that every muscle in your body would react if you just willed them to. This would allow the automaton to control its body. After that, Eisen took the next marble and thought about the proper version of modulation that he could think of. And for him, that was simply the ability to use different tools as if they were parts of his body, and this would allow the automaton to use its body no matter what it was made of. And at last, Eisen grabbed the third marble and thought about ways to express ownership. This one was quite abstract as well, since Eisen simply concentrated on how whatever was enchanted through him was to be used by him, and only him. Of course, that wasn't actually usually the case, but for the golem core, that was necessary. Each of the marbles respectively turned either a light red, green or blue. One after another, Eisen imagined each of the enchanting marbles to be transferred and moved into the soon-to-be golem core, and the mixture of these colors turned it into a dull snow white. Done. Eisen smiled and looked at the sphere laying in his hands while notifications popped up in front of him. Beast Golem Core, Quality. Perfect, Rank. 3. Description, a golem core that has been created by the Omni Craftsmaster Eisen. It has been specialized for beast-like forms with the use of a medium-grade beast gem. Due to the intense care and high grade of materials used, it was possible to break through both skills needed in the creation of this golem core. Effect: will pair with a compatible body when infused with mana. For creating an overwhelming quality item with the use of 2 skills, you gain +1 INT and +1 WS, perfect. Now I just need to wait for Aelren to bring me that wolf's corpse, and I can start working on the automaton's body. Eisen said with a grin and sat down on one of the chairs standing in front of the worktables and created a quick stone base to lay the golem core into so that it wouldn't roll off the edge somewhere and somehow get damaged. After a few minutes of thinking and looking at the different types of metals across the room, Eisen finally stood up and nodded to himself. Korea, make sure you stay here with the golem core now. It's going to get a little bit hot right now. The old man cracked his knuckles and changed from the leather armor he was still wearing into his blacksmithing outfit, the simple and wide baggy pants as well as the leather apron, and then began to prepare what metals he needed for the automaton. Since it would be a machine working under high pressure and tension at times, there would probably be one metal that's best for it. High tensile brass. Brass is an alloy made of copper and zinc, and by adding some manganese into the mixture, it would highly increase the alloy's tensile strength, which was simply perfect for the type of machine Eisen was about to create. It wouldn't be good to always have to replace every single part after a few days, after all. Eisen would use 2 parts copper, and 1 part zinc as the main alloy to make up brass, and then would add an amount of manganese that was equivalent to about 2% of that mass. And all of this would be done in the smeltery. Eisen began to heat it up hot enough to melt the manganese, the metal with the highest melting point of the 3 metals he would be working with. It would always be best to first melt the metal with the highest melting point, and then add the next metal in, with a little bit more than you actually need to account for some of the metal to be boiled away. The order this would be done in this case, would be manganese, then copper, and then the zinc. After the smeltery seemed hot enough to melt the first part of the alloy, Eisen threw the amount of manganese that he would need into the container, and waited for it to turn liquid. After that, Eisen stopped actively heating up the smeltery, and threw in the copper that he would need for the first batch. After this had molten down as well, Eisen simply added the zinc and quickly moved the container out of the smeltery with some tongs and poured them into ingot casts that were quite helpfully already in the workshop when he was led there by Aelren. He poured the mixture into them and then immediately moved on to the next batch. Eisen repeated this until he heard a knock on the door after finishing the overall 4th batch of brass ingots, with a dozen ingots per batch. When the first batch was slowly cool enough to be handled, Eisen smiled while seeing the ingot's gold-like color, and slowly opened the door. Ah, seems like you already got to work. Here is the body of a wolf you asked for. It was killed through the full force of my weakening breath, so it is completely intact. Aelren exclaimed while slowly placing the wolf corpse down onto the ground with his claws. Thank you. Now, if I can manage to keep at a fast pace, it should be done in 2 or 3 days, for at most. I hope that's fine. Eisen explained while carrying the body into the workshop and placing it onto the ground in a relatively large open area. Of course, how I said, as long as you are working diligently, you can take your time. Although I am quite curious to see what you needed this body for, of course. Then you'll just have to wait, I guess. Eisen chuckled lowly, and looked at the wolf body which he would use as a reference to create his wolf automaton. Chapter 63 Skeleton. You're listening at NovelFull.audio. Eisen went over to the crate and grabbed a knife that was supposed to be especially for dismantling a body and laid the wolf corpse on its back. He stabbed the knife into the body and pushed the knife into the wolf's underside and slowly cut it open to get rid of its organs. Eisen pushed his hands into the cold body and one after another pulled out the organs which he placed into a bucket to simply keep them somewhere, while placing the heart to the side to use it for something later. Next, Eisen carefully decided to get rid of the wolf's hide. He cut into the cold flesh and steadily moved the knife along over the wolf's bloody meat, slowly but surely skinning it. Eisen somewhat noticed the effect of Aelren's weakening breath, as it seemed like the wolf's fur was simply turning into dust whenever Eisen touched the hair. Shuddering at the thought of what could have happened if Aelren hit him with the full effect of his weakening breath as well, Eisen set the hide away. He wouldn't be using it for the automaton anymore. Sure, it was of quite high quality, but since it came from a rank 0 beast, it would simply pull down the overall rank and quality of the automaton, so he would use something else instead. After skinning the corpse, Eisen carefully prepared to get rid of the meat without breaking or cracking the bones, since Eisen would need them as a reference. He started with the limbs, cutting or scraping away the meat on the bones, and then did the same for the meat left on the wolf's torso, and at last went for the head. He needed to treat the skull carefully, since he also had a use for the wolf's eyes and brain, which Eisen set down next to the heart. Once Eisen had every single bone laying down on the ground in a way that showed him which bone belonged where in a wolf's body, Eisen got a new notification. Dismembering skill learned. Maybe this would have been easier if I had gotten that skill earlier. Well, nothing I can change about that now. First, let's make sure these don't go to waste. Eisen muttered to himself and walked over to where he placed the wolf's eyes, heart and brain. He poured the mana out of his body and enveloped one of the eyes in it, concentrating on its shape and what it was made of, successfully using mana copy to recreate it and saving it to his mana copy library. After doing that for the brain and heart as well, Eisen put all three of these body parts into the bucket together with the wolf's other organs, since he now did what he needed to do with them directly. Now, let's get to work. Eisen chuckled and cracked his knuckles before starting to heat up the forge and then grabbed his hammer together with one of the high-tensile brass ingots he made before. So, if I hurry up, I should be able to get about 20 done by the end of the day. It's already quite late, so I should keep going for a little bit and then go to sleep. The old man said to himself and then sighed out loudly. At least he would be able to spend the next day just completely making the parts for the automaton without distraction, so it should be possible to assemble it the day after tomorrow, and finish it the latest in 3 days. Trying to keep that plan in mind, Eisen placed the first brass ingot into the forge and waited for it to be hot enough, which only took about 4 or 5 minutes, and then he placed it onto the anvil that stood next to the forge with tongs. Eisen activated the crafting space for blacksmithing, then held the ingot in place and used tool connection on his hammer. What Eisen would be doing now was to recreate the wolf skeleton piece by piece through brass, and the first few bones he would be making for now would be relatively small. So, Eisen took the first bone he would recreate and inspected it closely to remember its shape, and then hit the brass ingot while simulating the same thing he did with his Zweihander, meaning that he pushed out a little bit of mana with each and every hit to infuse it into the brass bone. Once the first bone was done, Eisen walked back to the wolf skeleton spread across the ground and placed the brass version there where the real version of it was before, and then grabbed the next bone he would recreate after placing the other bone he just referenced into a bag. Well then. One done, only about 300 more to go. Eisen chuckled and began to work on the next brass bone. And that's the base skeleton done, then. Eisen exclaimed happily and looked at the large amount of brass bones lying in front of him. He had just finished the skull and placed it down onto the ground to the other bones, and decided to take a quick break. It took a bit longer than planned to really finish everything, but it was nice, relaxing work, so Eisen didn't mind. Although others would probably call it dull and repetitive, Eisen truly loved doing just this kind of thing. It was an amazing feeling to him to just be able to hammer onto metal for hours and hours on end, especially with something you could so clearly see progress with like the bones. But now, Eisen would prepare some special parts of the brass skeleton. The claws and teeth. As these would be the automaton's main means of attack, they couldn't be weak or dull, so Eisen decided to enchant them. He already made the brass bases for them, so he would only need to put the right enchantment onto them. The ones that Eisen chose to put on the teeth were, depending on what kind of tooth he would be enchanting right now, a cutting, piercing, or crushing enchantment. For the claws, Eisen simply chose cutting enchantments to help with slash attacks and possibly help in cutting into the ground for more grip during a sprint. So, one after another Eisen grabbed one of the 42 brass teeth and carved an enchantment into them. Whenever he finished one of the enchantments, Eisen pressed the tooth or claw against his arm to see how much strength he needed to cut through his skin to compare the sharpness with an enchantment to the sharpness without an enchantment. And truly, the enchantments were surprisingly effective. Part of that could be because of his blacksmithing and crafting space skills ranking up. The blacksmithing skill might have made it a little bit easier for Eisen to carve into metal, and the crafting space skill might have simply increased his control over his enchanting as well. When the blacksmithing skill ranked up, Eisen didn't really gain much beside now being able to work with higher tier metals now, as well as the regular side effect of ranking a skill up, which usually made it far easier to use and more effective. However, when the crafting space skill ranked up, the crafting space now affected the whole room he was in, as long as it wasn't too large. For example, he wouldn't be able to affect all of the treasure hall that he met Aelren in with the skill, and it would create the regular sphere that has grown about a meter in diameter, but when he was in a room like this smithy, the skill would now simply fill it out completely to allow Eisen to move around without worrying about the area of the crafting space. And of course, the bonus stats were a nice extra as well. So now that the brass skeleton was finished, Eisen would need to create the rest of the automaton, those parts that would support its movement on top of the beast golem core. The gears. Eisen already figured out how many he would need for what place, and what kind of joints he would need to create as well. He even thought about something like a circulatory system to supply lubrication to everywhere in the automaton's body at all times. Of course, a storage tank was included in that. So, Eisen got to work and spent the rest of the day creating gears, joints, tubes and tanks in numerous different sizes, as well as some static pieces to fill in certain parts of the body, until it was around midnight in the game. He was starting to feel quite tired, actually, despite the effect that you usually wouldn't feel exhaustion while fighting or crafting, and Correa was already long asleep on a small bed that Eisen created for her the night before. It wasn't really anything special so far, since Eisen simply made a square block out of wood with a slightly lowered center area, and then made something like a mattress, pillow and blanket with some fabrics and wool that he bought while in town. It was really quite adorable, if Eisen had to tell the truth. But for now, Eisen would ignore that and simply go to bed himself, so that he could start assembling the automaton's body. Eisen sat on the ground and looked at the brass bones and joints lying in front of him. This would probably be one of the hardest puzzles that Eisen ever finished. Well, hopefully finished. Either way, Eisen got to work and began to assemble the automaton piece by piece. He started with each of the legs, going from the largest bones to the smallest, and placed the different joints in between them whenever necessary, using transmutation to make sure they would really perfectly interlock without being able to simply fall apart while still being able to move. Once a leg was finished, Eisen would push the claws into their respective places around the paws, and then moved on to the next leg. After all 4 legs were done, Eisen assembled the skull, and had Correa help him out however she could so that she wouldn't just have to lie around all day. She mainly handed Eisen whatever tooth he needed to put into the skull next, but that was enough for her to feel proud that she could do anything at all. And then, Eisen began to assemble the spine, which he would use as the base to then build the torso. After all of the different, small pieces of the spine were connected to each other, Eisen added spines, shoulders and hips onto it to finish the torso. Now, Eisen simply had 6 different parts that he needed to connect with each other to finish the brass skeleton. He first connected the 4 legs to the torso, and then only needed to properly connect the head to the spine. At this point, when Eisen tried to let go of the skeleton, it simply dropped to the ground as if it was some kind of model skeleton one might find at a school, all of its limbs laying in completely weird directions. But at least it was a perfect start toward creating an automaton. Chapter 64 Senses. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Now it was time to fully construct the automaton. The first thing he would need to do was to prepare the golem core. Sure, it was technically ready to be used at this point, but Eisen wanted to take it a step further. He planned this from the moment that Moram told him that golem cores don't need to be spherical, but can function just as well in any shape, and may actually get better in more complicated shapes. So, Aizen created the crafting space for alchemy and then pushed out his mana to recreate the wolf's heart that he copied before, placing it over the golem core. Aizen activated his transmutation and carefully reshaped the golem core, making sure not to obstruct or change the runes that he placed into it with the beast crystal. Hoping that this would further increase the overall strength of the golem automaton, Aizen finally started to continue assembling it. He laid the brass skeleton onto the ground with its underside upward, and placed the container that he designated to hold the golem core heart into the center of the chest with the core inside of it, and began to place the first few gears and tubes around it. The gears would simply be to control the overall movement of the automaton, and Aizen already had another plan for how he would properly strengthen it and its movement later. The tubes on the other hand were supposed to be used to supply the automaton's joints with enough lubrication to properly move around. The tubes would later be connected to a tank where the lubricants would be stored, with another tube connected to the mouth so that it can simply be swallowed by the wolf automaton, although Aizen would also need to make sure that it could be opened or closed easily, so that really only the lubricants could enter the tank and not any unwanted substance that could clog the system. Either way, it took Aizen a few hours to connect all the tubes and gears to each other and properly implement the tank in a way that it wouldn't mess up the automaton's balance no matter if it was filled to the brim or nearly empty. At last, the base was done. Now Aizen only needed to finish the automaton up. He was already incredibly excited and wanted to see if everything was really working properly by pouring mana into the golem core and letting it connect to its body, but he wanted to make sure it properly connected to its whole body, and since it wasn't done yet, he would need to be patient. The next thing that Aizen decided to do was to create an information storage system for the automaton. Usually, it seemed like golems only stored information about current commands and their own body's abilities and limitations. But Aizen wanted his automaton to actually be able to obtain information and store them to use at a later time without having to give it commands all the time. After all, it should act like a proper beast, and not just a statue in the form of a beast that can move around a little bit when told to. So, Aizen used mana copy to form a mana version of the wolf's brain that he copied before, and searched through his items to look for a mana crystal that came as close to possible to that size. When he finally found one, Aizen transmuted it so that it would be in the exact shape of the wolf's brain before changing his crafting space to the enchanting one. Aizen grabbed his mithril needle and began to work on the relatively simple enchantment to turn this mana crystal brain into an actual information storage device. The alchemical symbol that he used was that of wisdom, which could also mean something like knowledge or similar. And the image that Aizen imagined while carving the center was that of an enormous library filled with thousands and thousands of books. Sure, there are a lot of things filled with far more knowledge than you might find in the library. You could probably store every single book in existence on your computer's hard drive if you wanted to, but it simply didn't give Aizen the feeling that there was just so much knowledge there. After all, what would give you a stronger feeling? Simply looking at the small icon on your computer that stands for your hard drive, or standing in the middle of a giant library with books over books surrounding you. At least to Aizen, it was the latter. And when it came to enchanting, it wasn't necessarily about what was inside the carved image, but about the feelings and thoughts connected to it. So, when Aizen finished the mana crystal brain, he moved on to the means of sensory perception. Meaning eyes, ears, nose, and tongue. Touch was apparently already something that golems could experience to an extent, so Aizen didn't need to give it to the automaton anymore. Since the eyes were the only part that may require a complicated shape, as despite being only a sphere from the outside, it was much more complicated than you may think. So, Aizen also used mana copy to form an eye of mana and shaped a mana crystal to look like it, with every single part being as closely reproduced as possible. And now, Aizen would use ability enchanting to give it sight. He grabbed one of the marbles and infused it with what it was like to see all kinds of things. Different colors, people, and views that were beyond beautiful. When he was done, not much changed in what the marble looked like, but Eisen knew that it was successful and he was able to put that physical ability onto it, before quickly transferring it to the mana crystal eye. The small sphere in Eisen's hand turned completely white, similar to what a real eye was like. After repeating this for the other eye, Eisen moved on to the nose. For this, he simply split off a small part off of a mana crystal and turned it into a rough crescent shape, which he then enchanted with the ability to smell. But, since a wolf was supposed to be able to smell far better than a person, he needed to do something else as well. Eisen took his smallest needle and carved an additional enchantment onto the small crescent that was supposed to amplify what the mana crystal could do. It wouldn't be able to change much about its strength, but apparently would still make it possible to enhance it about 1.5 times with Eisen's current abilities. It wasn't possible to do this kind of thing with most other enchantments, but luckily, this kind of thing was exactly what it was meant for. Next, Eisen created 2 small funnels out of parts of a mana crystal, and enchanted both of them with the ability to hear through ability enchantment, after which he also slightly enhanced them with the same enchantment that he used for the nose. Piece. Now Eisen would make the tongue, meaning that he needed to create the muscles to the automaton. And he already prepared a tool to make what he needed. He looked into the crate and grabbed the spinning wheel that he bought at Moram's place that would allow him to create magic strings. What Eisen would need to do for the tongue was relatively simple. In general, all mana crystals would be turned slightly softer so they could somewhat move, but then would be so tightly packed that they could turn basically completely solid in an instant. The normal mana. Crystal muscles would be enchanting in a way that would allow them to stretch and retract a little bit, while the tongue would be enchanted in a way that would allow the automaton to taste things. So, Eisen grabbed a mana crystal and simply used softening on it a slight bit and then grabbed an enchanting marble, before enchanting the crystal through it. Once that was done, Eisen infused his mana into the crystal and pushed it into the opening of the spinning wheel, leading to it releasing thin thread that was immediately rolled up. Eisen grabbed the end of the slightly flexible and stretchable string and began to pack it together as tightly together, cutting the string up and attaching the ends at the tip of the sewn to be tongue. It took a while, but soon enough, Eisen held a mana. Crystal tongue in his hands. To finish it off, Eisen smoothed the outermost layer off, so that nothing could get stuck in the strings somehow. And now, it was time to give the automaton these mana crystal body. Parts. First, Eisen opened up a hole big enough to fit the brain through into the skull and placed it inside, following which Eisen poured some water, that he just so slightly thickened up with hardening, into it to fill out leftover spaces and to make sure that it wouldn't be able to just move around in there constantly, somewhat holding it in place. After that, Eisen closed the hole in the top of the skull up again, and put the eyes into the 2 eye sockets, the nose. Crescent into the nose, and the ear. Funnels into the ears, before at last placing the tongue into the lower jaw, connecting each of the mana. Crystal sensory organs to the brass by using transmutation. Eisen smiled to himself thinking about the progress he made so far and grabbed the mountain of mana crystals out of the crate. I guess this will take a while. The old man chuckled, and got to work turning the mana crystals into strings, so that he could use them as the automaton's muscles. It was early afternoon of the next morning, and Eisen managed fully cover the whole automaton's body in muscles made of translucent mana crystal strings, nearly completing the automaton's construction. This took Eisen the rest of the last day, and nearly half of the next day, as Eisen had to connect every single strand on its own individually and make sure they were in the right position and composition to each other. Luckily, all that work counted toward tailoring, which made some sense considering that Eisen was basically sewing the mana crystal thread onto the automaton's body. But now, it was time to cover the muscles up and give the wolf some skin. For this, Eisen wouldn't be using the hide he actually got from the wolf, but instead leather coming from a rank 2 beast. The leather he would be using came from an earth-type monster, which would work great in synergy with the automaton that was completely made up of metal and crystal structures. The leather was thin, durable and flexible, as well as light in color, directly reminding of simple exposed skin, although with differences you could instantly notice. But since this leather wouldn't be seen in the end anyway, that didn't really matter. Eisen grabbed the sheets of the leather and brought it over to one of the work tables, also bringing the hide of the wolf there as well, since he could use it as a reference for how much leather he would need for each area of the wolf's body. Eisen grabbed his X-Acto knife and assembled it, before cutting the leather into the right sizes and shapes. Just by cutting the leather, Eisen knew that this would be a great material to use, since it was quite hard to cut even though it was exactly of the rank that Eisen was supposed to be able to work with, simply showing its natural strength and resilience. After Eisen finished cutting the leather up, he laid the part meant for the body over the wolf's back. He then took one of his sewing needles and put the wax thread meant to sew leather together through the hole at its end. It was now time to give the automaton skin. Chapter 65 Living Machine. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Eisen activated his leatherworking crafting space and tightly held the piece of leather meant for the automaton's torso together around the belly, before slowly stabbing through one of the sides with his needle to pull the wax threads through the sewn-to-be skin, simply but tightly sewing the leather together on the underside along its whole torso. After finishing attaching the large piece of leather on the wolf automaton's body, Eisen moved on to attaching one of the smaller pieces to the tail, and then did the legs next. Up until now, it was all relatively easy to do, simply sewing the piece itself together, and then sewing it to the pieces of leather immediately adjacent to it. This didn't require a lot of fine work, but simply patience, which Eisen had more than enough of. The parts that did in fact need a little bit more skill to do properly were the paws and the head, since they were smaller and slightly more complex than the other body parts. After Eisen sewed on the paws, he even added small ovals of thicker and stronger leather on the bottom to protect the skin while the automaton would be walking or running around. The last part that Eisen would now need to put leather onto was the head. He first added leather around the main part of the skull, leaving the snout and ears exposed, and connected it to the leather that was already around the neck. After that, Eisen added leather around the top and bottom of the snout, and all around the ears. There were now some loose areas, where Eisen wasn't able to fully attach the leather. These were around the mouth and eyes. What Eisen did to make sure they were properly attached, was to basically tack the edges to the outside of the automaton's body through adding some small brass pins and using transmutation to make sure everything fit properly. This would later be covered by fur anyway, so it didn't matter if the pins were still slightly visible. Now, the automaton was covered in a layer of strong leather, slightly darker than a wolf's regular exposed skin, but still making it look like someone simply shaved a wolf that went through a lot of operations in its life. But now, it was really time for the fur, and Eisen already had a great idea on what to do. He walked over to the wolf's hide, and pushed out his mana, completely enveloping the whole surface area of what used to be an animal's skin, including the fur, which was what Eisen wanted just there. Eisen tried to concentrate only on the fur, to basically only copy it instead of the whole hide. It took a while of going through every part of it and making sure that it was truly only the hairs that Eisen copied, but in the end, Eisen achieved his goal. He then immediately pushed out some of his mana and formed the multiple mana copies of the fur, piecing them together to create the proper shape before overlaying it with the wolf automaton, all the way down to creating the roots that would properly keep the hairs in the leather. After that, Eisen grabbed the leftover brass ingots, and held one of them onto the automaton's skin, activating his transmutation to make the hairs of mana pull in some of the brass ingot in his hand to create brass fur. The old man did this for every part of the automaton's body, until a wolf shining in a beautiful golden color stood in front of him. That was also a reason why he chose to create this automaton out of brass, beside it being a good material for it. Since brass could be mistaken for gold on first sight, Eisen thought it fit well with this being a test given to him by an ancient gold dragon. He would have made it out of gold, if it wasn't such a bad material to work with. It was great in small amounts for decoration, but it was far too heavy and soft to use properly for real equipment. So, brass was the best choice. But at that moment, Eisen didn't think about any of this anymore. He simply wanted to push his mana into the beast golem core to make it pair with the automaton body, and see if it properly worked. Before then, he slowly poured the lubricant that he brought with him down the throat of the wolf's body to fill the tank up and then closed the hatch to make sure it couldn't flow back out. Then, Aizen slowly placed his palms on the automaton's back and poured his mana out of his body, moving as much of it as possible toward the heart in its center. At first, Aizen thought it didn't work, but then he heard some rattling, cranking and creaking when the gears started to move, as well as the sound of the lubricant flowing through the pipes. The brass hairs stood on end and looked as if they were needles, but then soon enough settled down to make them look like proper fur. A light shine appeared in the mana crystal eyes, while the automaton's new muscles kept bulging and then relaxing, over and over again before settling down as well, seemingly showing that the golem core was able to pair with its new body. With an incredibly excited grin on his face, Aizen looked at notifications that popped up behind the automaton. Wolf Automaton, Golem, Quality. Perfect, Rank. 3, DP. 1500, MP. 10, STR. 75, AGI. 90, Int. 10, WIS. 1. Description: a special type of golem called an automaton created by the Omni Crafts Master Aizen. Its main structure is made completely of brass, and has different mana crystal constructs supporting it and giving it multiple bonus functions. The golem core has been enhanced with runes made of a beast gem, giving a bonus to the beast-like body, and allowing it to move more beast-like. This is also supported through the complex recreation of a wolf's heart. The mana crystal muscles allow it to be stronger and more agile. The brain synchronizes with the fake soul of the golem core and allows the automaton to have a growing wisdom stat, since it can now store knowledge. This knowledge is collected through the mana crystal eyes, nose, ears and tongue. The wisdom stat will start of low, but can grow over time. The agility stat will lose or gain effectiveness depending on the amount and quality of the lubricants passing through the automaton's body. For creating something of overwhelming quality with the use of 5 skills, you gain +2 to STR, END, AGI, INT and WS, yes. It works. It actually works. This is amazing. Aizen yelled out excitedly and kneeled down in front of the wolf automaton with a big grin on his face, moving his fingers through the cold brass fur while looking at the automaton with awe, and ignoring the doubled bonus stats from breaking through 5 of his skills. After a few minutes of simply checking if everything was truly alright with the automaton, Aizen stood up again, walking over to the table where Kuria was playing around and setting her down on his shoulder, before looking at the automaton. Follow me. Aizen commanded and watched as the automaton slowly turned its head in his direction and set one foot in front of the other, slowly moving forward. It was still moving quite clumsily, and despite its outer appearance that might suggest it being some kind of actual living creature, from its movements you could definitely see that it was a machine in the end. But still, that would hopefully soon change with the help of the specialized beast golem core and the automaton's mana crystal brain. Since something like that would only come from learning, Aizen decided to let it be for now, and show Aelren his creation. Aizen opened the wooden door and stepped outside of the workshop for the first time in days and was immediately met with the bright shine of the mountains upon mountains of gold coins and gems. The old man walked through the paths between those piles of treasure until he found Aelren lazing around on one of them again. "Ah, Aizen. What brings you out here?" Aelren asked while lowering his giant head to be on level with Aizen. The craftsman crossed his arms while filled with pride, and stepped aside to reveal the automaton behind him. "Well, I completed your test, Aelren." With a seemingly confused frown, Aelren looked at the wolf and then back to Aizen. "This is something you created. Are you sure you did not simply use necromancy? It looks so life-like." The gold dragon said with surprise and was enveloped with steam before turning into his humanoid figure. "Thank you, I worked quite a while on it, as you noticed. It's an automaton, basically a mechanical golem. It's completely made of brass and mana crystals. Inside of the body are a number of gears and tubes, and it has a metal skeleton. I used some leather as a skin replacement, and gave it brass fur as well. And it actually has all 5 senses, since I gave it eyes, ears, a nose and a tongue, and it can store all of that info in a mana crystal brain that I enchanted as well. The claws and teeth were enchanted to make combat easier. That's about it, really. If you want I can explain things in more detail. Aizen exclaimed excitedly while squatting down next to the automaton and running his fingers through the metal fur again. There is no need, dear Aizen, I can already see that this is quite an impressive creation. But let us see what it can do, shall we? Aelren asked and nodded at Aizen, signaling him to show what the automaton could do. Of course. But be aware that this is technically a golem, and my golmancy skill is still at rank 0, so you know, it might not be able to move around in great ways. Anyway. Automaton, run to the wall over there, and come back. Aizen commanded and pointed toward a part of the wall that was in direct sight and could be gotten to in a straight line from their current position. Immediately, the automaton sprinted forward as quickly as it could. It stopped in a way that let it just barely not hit the wall, and then it turned around and came sprinting back to Aizen. The automaton was able to move quite fast, and you were able to see an immediate difference between its movements on its way to the wall compared to when it came back. It seemed like the effect of the beast golem core already started showing itself, as it apparently began getting more and more used to its new body. Now, try to jump over that pile of gold. Aizen commanded with his hand waved at a relatively small amount of treasures, one that was still nearly the height of Aizen, and the automaton ran off toward it and jumped at the last second, nearly instantly reaching the height necessary to jump over the shiny mountain. When Aizen heard that it landed on the other side, he commanded it to come back again. Like this, Aizen had the automaton do a few different simply tasks, basically just small tricks, and then showed different parts of its body to Aelren. Bedo them things like how sharp its teeth or claws were, or where exactly he put the sensory organs in the automaton's head. And soon enough. I've seen enough. This is obviously far beyond what I could have expected coming into existence within such a short amount of time. I hope for you to show me what it will be like in the future. And I am more than happy to tell you that you passed my second test. Aelren explained with an impressed smile, and a notification popped up in front of Aizen. Quest successful. Ancient Gold Dragon's second test. Description: after passing the Ancient Gold Dragon Aerontirtha's first test, you now have to take his second test. For that, he asked you to make something great to impress him. As long as you work diligently and do not abuse his hospitality, there is no time limit. Reward: you will be allowed to take the Ancient Gold Dragon's third test. Failure: you will never be allowed to take another Ancient Gold Dragon's test. Time limit: none. Congratulations. You passed the Ancient Gold Dragon's second test. Aizen, race. Giant, Dwarf Halfling, occupation. Omni Craftsmaster, level. 71, HP. 1854, MP. 1876, STR. 104, End. 104, AGI. 103, Int. 105, Wis. 106, Cha. 10, Titles: Casanova, Original of the Mechanical Arts, Limit Breaker V, Skills, A Dwarf's Hands, Rank 2, Level 89, A Giant's Strength, Rank 2, Level 68, Alchemy, Rank 2, Level 31, Appraisal, Rank 1, Level 7, Blacksmithing, Rank 2, Level 39, Cooking, Rank 0, Level 68, Crafting Space, Rank 1, Level 81, Dismembering, Rank 0, Level 1, Drawing, Rank 1, Level 6, Enchanting, Rank 2, Level 11, Flame of the Earth Magic, Rank 1, Level 51, Golmancy, Rank 0, Level 19, Leatherworking, Rank 2, Level 16, Lockpicking, Rank 0, level. 1, mana copy, rank. 1, level. 26, mana double, rank. 2, level. 46, mana manipulation, rank. 2, level. 36, swordsmanship, rank. 2, level. 74, tailoring, rank. 2, level. 41, taming, rank. 0, level. 11, tool connection, rank. 1, level. 61, woodworking, rank. 0, level. 49. Chapter 66 Dedication. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Now comes the last test, Eisen. The first one was to test your body. The second one was to test your skill. And this last one is to test you. Your dedication, your personality, and how far you are willing to go. Aelren explained and slowly stepped forward through the room waving at Eisen to follow him, who quickly did so after commanding the automaton to follow him. And what would that kind of test look like? Eisen asked curiously, looking at the back of the ancient dragon in human form while looking behind himself every once in a while to make sure the automaton was following properly. It took a while, but they soon found themselves in front of the mist-filled room directly in front of the entrance to the treasury. Walk inside. Your test is waiting for you. Aelren said with a calm voice, his fingers interlocked behind his back. Eisen nodded slowly and excitedly walked into the mist, leaving Correa with the automaton next to Aelren, since he didn't know what would wait inside. After walking a few dozen steps forward, Eisen saw something through the mist, that was unusually thick right now. It was bright pink hair, bound into two twin tails. Or rather, one full twin tail while the other was hanging rather loosely down the side of the girl's face. Shocked at this unexpected sight, Eisen ran forward to get a closer look, and found exactly who he thought to be there. It was Bree. She was kneeling on the ground, with her arms and feet tied together behind her back and her mouth gagged. Tears were streaming down the side of her face, while she was trying to yell at Eisen, asking him to help her. Immediately, he stepped forward, trying to tie her loose, but before he could, Aelren's voice echoed through the hall. Do not do that, Eisen. What do you think your test is? The dragon asked, his voice coming from everywhere around Eisen, but at the same time from nowhere exactly. It was truly as if dozens of Aelrens were suddenly all around him, talking at the same time while moving around randomly. Eisen hesitated slightly, this alone already nearly breaking his heart. Seeing his friend and companion down there on the ground like that was just horrible, even if this was simply a game. To Eisen, this would probably be the world he will spend most of the rest of his life in, so it would turn just as real to him as it was for the original inhabitants of this world. While kneeling down in front of Bree, the old man asked with a calm face. What the hell are you talking about? What kind of test is this supposed to be? Suddenly, Aelren's voices began to laugh in a sinister way. How I said, this is to test you. Your dedication to our cause. Your dedication to me and my brothers and sisters, and to our King Trigon. Eisen continued trying to untie the ropes that bound Bree, but whatever he did, they only seemed to become tighter instead of loosening up. Again, what are you talking about? He asked in a voice even calmer than before, as anger started to well up inside of him, wanting to explode outward the moment he heard the dragon's answer coupled with sinister laughter from multiple sources at once. Kill her. Some of the voices said in unison while the others simply continued laughing, until they suddenly stopped. No sound was coming from anywhere, and they stopped as suddenly as if someone simply paused a soundtrack. A few seconds of complete silence later, a devilish voice spoke out. It was Aelren's, but at the same time, it wasn't. You're simpler than I thought, Eisen. I thought it would be easy to figure out. This is your companion, isn't she? The friend that has been accompanying you for most of your adventures, as far as you can remember, right? So what would be a better way for you to prove your dedication? Once more, laughter broke out around Eisen and Bree, and one after another some of them began to talk, each one saying only one sentence and then continuing their routine of horrid comedy. What would be better? If you don't want to kill her, then what else could you do? How about we have you slaughter everyone else in Melro instead? Every one of those people that helped you out. Just imagine it, Aizen. All those people screaming for help while you slice them up. There was a short break while cold sweat began to drip down Aizen's back, as he simply knew this wasn't the last of what the voices had to say. And he was right. That would be simply beautiful, would it not? The last of the voices asked, before it began to laugh again, being joined by more and more every single second until it sounded as if a whole stadium filled with people was laughing together. That was, until Aizen responded. No. Stop it. Be quiet, Ailren. I'm not doing this. To hell with your damn tests. He yelled out angrily, trying to look around and see if he could find Ailren somehow. But before Aizen could do anything else, another, single one of Ailren's voices began to talk. Oh. You're a feisty one, are you not? You would give up all of the benefits you could gain through simply killing one Sinel Fei.Kin, only to preserve her life. What a joke! In front of Aizen, a figure emerged. It was a young woman. Somehow, Aizen thought she was incredibly beautiful, with her long black hair that reached down to her hips and the overall aura she gave out, even though he couldn't directly see her facial features through the thick mist. You could have whatever you want, Aizen. All the women that are needed to please you for the rest of your life, or treasures even more numerous than those in this cave. With those words, glittering gold coins started to rain down onto the ground around Aizen, while the young woman seductively moved around him, only ever so slightly touching his body with her fingertips. You could rule the world, Aizen. You could be a king, with everyone at your feet. Just imagine it for a second. Millions of people just celebrating you for simply existing. It sounds beautiful, does it not? Cheers started to roar out from all around Aizen, as if he was literally surrounded by tens of thousands of people, all screaming at him happily. Some of them seemed to be saying something, but Aizen couldn't make out what those things were. Slowly, Aizen closed his eyes, and slowly muttered out. All of this could be mine. If I kill Bree. The old man stumbled toward his friend, his companion, the one that kept helping him out simply because she wanted to. A small blade was suddenly lying on the ground in front of her body, and she was shaking her head in horror the closer he approached. With shaking hands, Aizen picked up the knife and moved behind her. He held the knife in front of the center of her back, and muttered out a few simply words before making his decision. I'm sorry. And like that, he moved the knife quickly but carefully, to make sure he would finish this quickly without any further problems. It sounded to Aizen as if something ripped in half, before he looked at what was lying in his hands and threw it to the side. When he heard the soft sound of the first rope landing a few meters away from him, the second followed soon after, and the gag was removed by Aizen as well, of course. I'm sorry, Ailren, but screw you. I would never kill a friend for something like that. Who do you think I am? And more importantly, who do you think you are? Complete silence was Aizen's answer while his anger only grew. He tried to walk forward to find one of the walls that could lead him to Ailren's position, while continuing to yell out. Where are you? Why are you doing so something this horrible? Ailren, get over here. What? Aizen began to stutter slowly as the mist around him dissipated and he looked at Ailren's humanoid form standing there with a bright, happy smile on his face while clapping his hands together. Magnificent, Aizen. I could not have said it better myself. I knew you were the right person for the position of champion. He chuckled happily and walked a few steps forward toward Aizen before lowering his head. I am sorry for tricking you like this. Your friend is not here, don't worry. She is still safe and sound down in Melro. Aizen looked around with wide open eyes at the place where Bree just stood. But, she was just. Ailren, I'm confused. What is going on? Was this magic? Well, dear Eisen, as I said, this was a test of dedication. But not to the cause, as the mist whispered to you, but dedication to your friends and companions. Many would have immediately faltered in the face of such promises. Follow me inside again, okay? I will explain everything in more detail shortly, and of course give you what you deserve for passing my tests. Aelren chuckled and turned around before slowly walking back to the treasury, leaving Eisen to stand there in confusion while waving away the notification that told him that he passed the last of the ancient gold dragon's tests. He was embarrassed. Eisen acted as if this was such a huge deal, but he forgot a simple thing at that moment. Without keeping that thing in mind, he reacted as he would in real life, but in here. Magic existed. Maybe someone with more knowledge about these fields would have been able to see through it, but not for one moment did Eisen consider Aelren to be tricking him somehow. Was he too trusting? Or maybe he had some kind of hidden disdain for Aelren that made Eisen somehow immediately believe that he was capable of something like that. Eisen didn't think so, but something was definitely wrong. But Eisen didn't want to think of something like that right now. With a soft smile, happy that everything was all right after all, Eisen moved his hand to his heart. He was somehow feeling incredibly agitated. It wasn't because he was tricked. Eisen wouldn't brood on something like this for more than a few seconds. He was far too old for thoughts like that. It was something else, as if somehow a mixture of anger, sadness, and happiness. But just where did that emotion come from? When did he start to feel it? And why of all things would he start feeling like this in the middle of that test? Somehow, he felt as if he just met someone that he has longed to see for years and years on end, but was always disappointed when trying to recall their features, their face. And when Eisen finally realized what it was that made him feel this way, he squatted down onto the ground, looking to the roof of the cave without seeing the rock and simply seeing the empty void that was hidden beyond it. There was something that Eisen felt was off since he started playing this game. Maybe it was because he was so used to feeling it, that he simply didn't notice when it was gone. The old man moved his hand to his ring finger and moved his fingertips across the place where his wedding ring had been for the last 45 years. This made him realize what made him feel this way all of a sudden. That figure, that oh so beautiful young woman that he saw just now. Right down to her posture and her long black hair. She looked just like Hanako. Chapter 67 Truth-Seeing Eyes. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Eisen stepped into the tunnel leading away from the mist-filled hall and looked at the automaton in front of him. He squatted down and carefully moved his hand through its fur while placing Kuria back on his shoulder. I can't just go on with calling you automaton all the time, huh? Then how about I name you? Let's see. The body I took as reference seemed to be a female wolf's. So how about Alu? Pretty straightforward, right? A simple mixture of the Latin words for gold and wolf. Since your fur really does make you seem as if you're made of gold. Eisen said calmly, still kind of shaken up because of that test just now. Alu, follow me. He commanded, and it, or she, turned and began to follow Eisen as he walked through the tunnel. Not long after this, Eisen entered the treasury again and made his way to the place where the golden table stood when he was talking to Aelren in his human form for the first time, and as expected, the ancient gold dragon was sitting there, already pouring Eisen a cup of tea. Take a seat, Eisen. The dragon said and waved Eisen toward the seat on the other side of the table. He nodded and did so, all the while quietly looking at Aelren with a deep frown. Noticing that Eisen wouldn't initiate the conversation, Aelren did instead. To begin, I am extraordinarily sorry for that test. This was somehow even more intense than even I expected it to be. I am sorry. That mist is a special one. It is supposed to scare away unwanted visitors most of the time, but it can also be used in such a way. The intention of that test was to find out if you would sacrifice your friend for money or fame. Of course I knew you wouldn't, but it still needed to be done. Aelren explained, and Eisen looked at him with a deep frown, before his face loosened up and he sighed. I understand. But now that I've passed this test, I hope none of the tests from other dragons I might take are this messed up. He muttered out and crossed his arms, while Korea noticed his upset state and decided to try and hug him to cheer her master up. With a soft smile, Aizen looked down at her and rubbed the top of her cap, before looking back at Aelren. Anyway, I'm not too angry about what just happened back there. It was horrible in the moment, but in retrospect, I understand what it was for. Of course, I am still angry, and I have a few questions, but I guess those can wait for later. So, what happens now that I've passed your tests? The old man asked, and Aelren chuckled in response. Quite eager, I see. But I guess after the time you spent on these tests, you truly deserve this. Here, give me your hand. Aelren said and held his arm forward with his palm pointed upward, in response of which Aizen slowly moved his hand and grabbed Aelren's hesitantly. Now close your eyes. You might feel an uncomfortable heat, but bear with it please, and make sure not to open your eyes. The gold dragon explained and Aizen nodded, closing his eyes just like Aelren told him to. Shortly afterward, he felt the heat that Aelren mentioned just now. It wasn't actually hot, it was just the kind of heat you might feel while sitting a bit too close in front of a campfire. It was somewhat uncomfortable, but definitely bearable. This heat was starting to move through Aizen's body, starting from his hands where his skin touched Aelren's, and then moved toward Aizen's chest and then his head, until this heat infected his eyes, collecting there and becoming hotter and hotter. But even though it became hotter, it wasn't like it really hurt, it was still just uncomfortable, so Aizen was able to bear it and keep his eyes closed. A whole minute later, Aelren let go of Aizen's hand, leading to the heat simply disappearing slowly over time. Alright, it's done. You can open your eyes now. The ancient gold dragon announced, and Aizen nodded slowly before opening his eyes carefully. For a moment, the whole world was blurry and lost all its color, before everything returned to normal slowly over the span of a few seconds, and directly afterward a notification popped up. Congratulations! You have been chosen as a champion by the ancient gold dragon Aelrentirth. Champion title unlocked. Ancient gold dragon Aelrentirth gave you his gift, a part of your body has been changed, truth-seeing eyes skill learned, truth-seeing eyes absorbed appraisal, bringing its proficiency to rank 0, level 25, truth-seeing eyes. Aizen muttered out while reading through the different notifications, leaving Aelren to nod in response. Yes, it is my gift. Every dragon possesses one to give their champions. Mine allows you to literally see the truth. It lets you see through lies, and every trick that one may use to fool you. You can find out what something truly is. It has some functions similar to the appraisal skill, that you also seem to possess already. Although, if you don't want others to know about this ability, you will have to hide your eyes while using it. Here, activate your eyes and take a look. Aelren explained while standing up and looking through nearby treasures until he found a small hand mirror, which he then held in front of Aizen's face. Aizen nodded and closed his eyes before concentrating on this new skill. It seemed like this black and white view he had before was the effect of the skill, so he tried to call upon that feeling once more. When he felt a little bit of that same heat as before in his eyes again, Aizen opened them up and looked at his reflection in the mirror. His usually gray eyes turned into a pure and bright golden color, with his pupils turned into slits instead of the regular circle. Incidentally, the gold of his eyes was the only color that he could see, while the rest of the world turned into a blurry black and white again. What's this? This is quite interesting. Aizen muttered out in complete awe while looking at his reflection. But while he was doing so, he saw some kind of symbol, something like a small white circle, in the center of the mirror. It didn't seem to be reflected, and was apparently something that only existed in that exact instance. Aizen concentrated on that circle, and it began to twist and turn before slowly expanding to show a notification window. Usually those were light blue in color, but this one was simply completely white. Handcrafted golden mirror, quality. High, rank 1, 0. This is more than appraisal usually tells me. Aizen exclaimed in surprise, and Aelren chuckled lowly. Of course it is. After all, appraisal is a very, very basic skill. The truth-seeing eyes are quite high tier. Then I thank you, Aelren. This will probably be pretty useful, especially when I rank the skill up. If it can already tell me this much at rank 0, then I wonder what it can do at rank 4 or 5, or even at rank 10. Haha, I'm happy you like these eyes, then. I myself find them to be quite useful. Now, shall we continue our talk? The ancient gold dragon suggested, and Aizen nodded before closing his eyes again, concentrating on removing the heat he was feeling in his eyes. Soon enough they cooled down, and Aizen opened his eyes again. He was still holding the mirror in front of his face, so he was able to immediately see that his golden eyes turned gray again and his pupils returned to their regular shape as well. Of course, the world around him regained its color as well. Now that his new skill has been disabled, Aizen looked at Aelren to continue the conversation. So, what I'm wondering now is quite simple. What does it mean that I'm now a champion? Aelren smiled, since he obviously expected such a question. It is quite simple, really. If it were to come to an actual confrontation between the two draconic factions, we would need you to help us somehow. In your case, it would be through providing us with whatever non-combat support you can, meaning through creating tools or weapons. But being a champion also has its perks. You will be able to more easily meet with other metallic dragons, and metallic dragon halflings will also support you in any way they can. There are other small benefits here and there, but those are really the most important ones. The ancient gold dragon explained, and Aizen nodded while scratching his beard in thought. A few seconds later, he asked his next question. And where can I meet other metallic dragons? Since I'm a champion already, I might as well become a true one, right? And since I don't really have any real goals for traveling around so far, those might be some good places to go. Ah, I can tell you a few places to look. It's been a while since I've socialized with others of my kind, so I am not completely sure where they might be, but I can at least somehow hint you toward places. First, my friend Boremger, a bronze dragon. The last time I've met him, he told me about wanting to go to a coastal town that seemed to be centered largely around magic. Then there is Zordador, a steel dragon. I've heard a rumor that he helped build up a town in a desert somewhere. He would probably be the hardest to find, at least with the information I can give you. We aren't on best terms. Markier the Silver Dragoness might be the closest one to us right now. She was keen on creating her lair on the tallest of all mountains, which can be found here in the Dwarven country. It is quite a hard climb though, so it may still take longer than simply traveling to another country along the roads. And at last, there is Krakton, the Copper Dragon. He may be the most annoying out of all of us. Quite a jokester, to be honest. Anyway, he was always someone that appreciated the natural trickery that forests provided, whatever that means, and I've heard he was somewhere around the Beastlands, the country of beast people. There are a lot of jungles there, so that would be a good place to start looking. Aelren lengthily explained while Aizen was carefully making mental notes that he would remember to write down as soon as he logged out the next time. Alright, I'll go to all those places, then. Thanks for the information. So, if every dragon has a gift to give out, does that mean if I go visit them, they will give me abilities as well? As long as you pass their tests, yes. They will get harder the more you are approved by different dragons, so I wouldn't take it too lightly. Don't worry, I won't do that. So, Aelren, I have an important question for you. The figure of that woman you made appear inside of the mist. Who was that? Aizen asked with a calm voice, looking Aelren straight in the eyes. The ancient gold dragon frowned softly. That woman. Oh, right, she was mentioning something about all the women you want, during the test, huh? I guess it would be easier to simply show you. I'm not actually the one controlling that mist. It's an entity on its own, her name is Kirisho. She is usually dormant, but every once in a while, I wake her up for special occasions. Aelren explained while standing up and walking back toward the tunnel leading to the front of the cave. Slightly confused, Aizen followed Aelren and commanded Alu to do so as well. Soon, they once more found themselves at the room that they just left. She's usually not supposed to show herself, but I guess she couldn't resist it this time around. It's been a while since she really had the chance to be around another person. With a soft smile, Aelren stepped a few meters into the mist and began to address the mist itself. Carisho, you're still awake, am I right? How about I formally introduce you to my guest? The gold dragon asked, and soon enough it seemed as if a woman's soft chuckle came from within the mist. I would love that, Aelrentirth. The woman laughed out softly and the whole mist began to move around, twisting in a circle until it all came together a few steps in front of Aelren. After a few seconds, some of the mist that was collected in that one spot simply disappeared, and a woman was left in its center. She was wearing a robe, similar to a yukata, seemingly made mostly of white mist with a few areas filled out with black smoke. She was the woman that Aizen SW during the test. It was probably the stressful situation, or the words, all the women that are needed to please you, simply made him think of his wife, Hanako, but while thinking back on Carisho's figure, he thought to have seen his wife. But now that he could actually have a good look at her, it was more than clear that it wasn't his wife. Sure, she had a few features similar to his wife when both of them were still young, but those similarities seemed to be just coincidences. On top of that, while Carisho may have a few Japanese features, she seemed to have Western ones as well. Maybe they looked similar to each other in a way that distant cousins might, but if you looked at both of them next to each other, it was obvious that they didn't really look alike at all, although both of them are extremely beautiful. With a loud sigh, Aizen shook those thoughts away and stepped forward toward the woman of mist Carisho, holding out his hand to greet her. Nice to meet you, Carisho. My name is Aizen. Chapter 68 Dessen. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Carisho smiled softly and held her snow-white hand forward toward Aizen's to greet him back. Nice to meet you too, Aizen. I'm Carisho. It's a pleasure. It seems that you have passed the last test. Congratulations on becoming a champion, then. She giggled lightly and held her hand in front of her mouth while closing her eyes, making Aizen smile in response. Thank you. This is really unexpected, though. I figured that this wasn't regular mist, but I never expected it to be a person. Aizen's words made Carisho slightly jump in surprise before tilting her head to the side. Person. You think of me as a person? She asked in confusion, and Aizen nodded with a frown. Of course, aren't you? I mean, I don't really care whether or not you're a monster, elf, human, fairy, or literally anything else. You seem nice enough, and Aelren trusts you enough to let you guard the entrance to this place. So yeah, I think of you as a person. The old man explained, leaving Carisho's white cheeks to slowly turn a very soft, light pink. I see. Thank you, Aizen. Would it be alright if I asked you something? She smiled, and Aizen nodded. Sure, I don't mind. What do you want to know? He said, and Carisho nodded slowly. Who is Hanako? Aizen opened his eyes wide. He wasn't embarrassed about anything that he did during or immediately following the test, but he completely forgot that he, was supposed to have forgotten. But now, he can't just pretend as if him saying Hanako's name never happened. So, he decided to take the truth, and mix it in with the story that Ari prepared for the originals. Somehow, I remembered a certain person during the test while seeing you and hearing what the voices told me. Hanako. She was my wife. But she passed away a long time ago. I guess I just kind of got emotional because of that. Aizen explained and Carisho began to show a sad face. So it was something like that. I see. I'm sorry that I reminded you of her, Aizen. But I have to go now. I'm feeling quite tired. Kirisho said while struggling to keep her eyes open, her figure slowly losing shape. Then sleep well, Kirisho. Let's talk again sometime. Aizen smiled, and Kirisho nodded lightly, before she slowly turned completely back into mist, filling out the whole room once more. Aizen turned around and looked at Aelren, who was watching with a curious look. This was quite interesting. She usually doesn't talk all that much. And I can say for sure I have never seen her blush before. The dragon chuckled lowly. With a frown, Aizen simply ignored him and began to ask what was worrying him. Is this simply her life? She is asleep for hours, days, or even months, and when she can wake up, she can only do so for half an hour. Aelren sighed and looked at Aizen with a sad face. Yes, but it hasn't always been like this. You see, Kirisho is a mist spirit. She lived a short but happy life, and for certain reasons I am not in liberty to tell you about, in death she wasn't allowed to move on to the afterlife. She was trapped in this world through a wicked creature's curse, and was as such bound to an amulet in a dormant state. That amulet was one that I coincidentally found during one of my travels, and through my truth-seeing eyes, I was able to discern that there was a soul trapped inside and freed her. For a while, she was basically like a regular person, sleeping at night and wide awake at day, but then something happened a few years ago. A group of adventurers made their way to this mountain and through to my treasury while I was out, and Kirisho was all alone to take care of this cave. The adventurers found her and immediately tried to kill her, thinking she was some kind of simple monster in the form of a woman. Soon enough, they figured out that the amulet was the source of her being and were able to shatter it into pieces. An important part of the gem embedded inside of it stayed intact, allowing Kirisho to continue living, although in the state you see now. Sadly, the adventurers took the rest of the gem and amulet with them. Aizen turned away from Aelren so that he couldn't see his face at this moment. Instead, he looked into the mist-filled room. That's a horrible thing. Aelren, is there any way I can help? Do you mean it? Aelren asked with a surprised frown, and Aizen nodded. Yes, I just want to help. Something like this isn't nice to look at. Kirisho is here, but she isn't at the same time. Every once in a while she is capable of talking to others. That's no way to live, is it? I'm glad that you want to help, Aizen. Then yes, there is a way you can help me. During Kirisho's fight with the adventurers, one of them lost their identification tag. I have it in the treasury. You might be able to find out who and where this group is. New quest. Stolen shards. Description: a group of adventurers destroyed the amulet in which the mist spirit Kirisho was sealed, taking the majority of the shards with them. This left Kirisho in a state that only barely allows her to consciously exist. You want to help, and thus the ancient gold dragon Aelrentirth asked you to find the adventurers, and as such hopefully the shards of the amulet, with the help of one of the adventurers' identification tag. Find the stolen shards and combine them together again. Reward: Kirisho will be able to live a normal life again. Failure: Kirisho will continue living the life she currently has. That sounds like a good place to start, yeah. Thanks, Aelren. Aizen said before reading through the quest notification and then waving it away, and then followed the dragon back to the treasury, where he quickly gave him the small iron plate in the shape of a dog tag. It had a small engraving which he couldn't recognize, as it was neither a language that he knew nor a symbol that he's seen before. Aelren looked at Aizen and smiled. I hope you can find them. Now, the tests are over. Do you want to get back to Melro? I'm sure your friends are waiting eagerly for your return. I can fly you back there again if you want. He suggested, but Aizen shook his head. Thanks, but I'll probably just walk. I want to give Olu some proper experience to handle different terrains, so a descent from here would be just perfect. I'll come visit sometime again, though. And thank you for the chance to be a champion, Aelren. Of course. I am glad that things went like they went. And like that, Aizen grabbed his things out of the workshop and made his way down the mountain again, with Kuria on his shoulder and Alu following behind him. Alright Kuria, I'm holding it tightly and it can't escape, so go ahead and kick it, alright. As hard as you can. Aizen said while holding a rank 1 stone mole so that it couldn't move. During the descent, whenever they came across a monster that was weak enough for him to easily beat without much trouble, he would try and let Kuria attack them as much as she could so that she would get a portion of the experience to rank her up. Right now, she still couldn't really do much at all, so he wanted to get her to rank up so that she would unlock the INT and WIS stats, and with that, mana. Like that, she could learn a number of different skills that she wouldn't be able to otherwise. Since Aizen wanted to raise her toward being someone to rely on for different herbs and plants to use for alchemical concoctions, possibly even to have her run a small farming plot once Aizen found a nice spot to build a house. The tiny Myconid nodded her head and ran up to the stone mole to kick it as strongly as it could. Of course, that still wasn't very strong, but it was enough for the system to recognize her as one of the attackers before Aizen finished the mole off. As Kuria couldn't do a lot of damage, she also didn't get a lot of experience, but at the very least it was enough to have her rank up before they reached Melro again. To be fair, Aizen went out of his way to look for monsters when he saw that Kuria was getting closer to ranking up. When she did, Kuria turned into Myconid Child, doubling her size. On top of that, she even finally gained 2 arms. They were just small stubs, but it was better than no arms at all, right? Seeing her new transformation, Kuria looked up at Aizen with her like eyes happily and jumped at him, for once giving him a real hug. It's fine, Kuria, I'm happy about it too, trust me. Now, how about we get back to the inn and see if we can practice some mana manipulation later, alright? If I can do it, then I bet you can as well. Aizen laughed out loud and waved at Alu to make her follow him as they came closer and closer to Melro while sitting Kuria down on his shoulder. It was somewhere around early evening, and the last of the laborers that were working outside of town were now returning as well. Aizen walked through the crowds of people that wanted to meet up in order to go drinking after a long day at work, and made his way toward the inn. It took a while longer than it usually would, since Alu didn't know how to walk through crowds like this yet and simply walked straight ahead so that she simply pushed everyone aside if Aizen didn't specifically told her where to go. Even so, after a while they made it to the inn safely. Aizen walked through the front door and then stepped up in front of the front desk to talk to the innkeeper. "Oh, old man. Haven't seen ya in a few days. Where've you been?" The dwarf asked in a loud voice once he set eyes on Aizen, causing the old man to chuckle lowly. "Yeah, I was doing something a little out of town." "Say, are Bree and the beasts we came with last time here?" Aizen asked. "They're in their room." "Ah, that monkey kid woke up as well yesterday, so he should be in there too." The innkeeper explained, and Aizen thanked him before making his way to the large room on the bottom floor where him and Bree brought Juk and his beasts a few days prior. He knocked on the door and heard someone rush to the door that slowly opened up a few seconds later. "Yees. Bree asked with an already bright smile that only grew brighter when she saw that it was Aizen at the door. "Ah. You're back. How was it?" she asked excitedly and pulled Aizen inside of the room to talk to him. Inside was the other person that the innkeeper mentioned to be awake, Juk. He was currently seated on one of the beds, feeding his beasts. When he saw Aizen, he immediately stood up and walked up to him. "Aizen. Bree told me you were on top of some mountain. Come on, tell us how it went. And what are those two?" Juk asked slightly confused, and even Bree looked curiously at Alu. "Ah, let me explain. First off, this is my cute little girl Kuria. She's a Myconid. She actually hatched out of the egg that you gave me." Aizen explained. "So that was a Myconid egg. Interesting." The monkey beast person exclaimed and leaned in closer, which made Kuria try and hide behind Aizen's head somehow. Bree tilted her head, though, and asked, "But she seems a little bit bigger than before, right?" Yeah. She ranked up not too long ago. On my way down the mountain, I killed a few beasts and had her attack them as well so that she would get some experience to rank up. She grew in size and got arms, but other than that, she's the same as before. Aizen explained and held Korea forward on both of his hands to basically show her off. Both Juk and Bree looked at her a few seconds, until their gaze inevitably moved over to Alu. Aizen then told them about the tests that he got from Aelren, and how he created Alu as an automaton in order to use all of his most important skills. He then showed them the effect of his new skill as well so that they knew what it looked like. After he finished his story, Juk leaned back against the wall. Oh. Maybe I should go see that dragon as well. But Aizen shook his head to advise against it. I wouldn't, if I were you. First, I don't even know if you can simply go to a dragon and ask him to test you. If one of them thinks you're worthy, then they will approach you themselves. Also, I'm not too sure how well the truth-seeing eye would fit to you. Sure, you could probably use it to identify different monsters and plants, right? But maybe another dragon would find interest in you that can give you a gift that fits much better to you. For me, it's perfect. It lets me easily identify different properties of tools, weapons and materials. I can tell most of it myself, but I can't really do so with magical materials. Maybe I'll be able to see the flow of magic at some point or something, and considering my 2 magic-related crafting skills, that would be perfect. Well, it's your choice, but I would wait for a dragon to ask you to take the tests. I'm sure it will happen, don't worry. Aizen explained to Juk, and he ended up sighing loudly. Yes, that makes sense. So, Aizen, what do you want to do next? The beast person asked, and Aizen chose to tell them his plans. Chapter 69 Omegas. You are listening at novelfull.audio. So your plan for now is to find those adventurers and get those shards back. Juk summed up after Aizen told them about the situation. In response, the old man nodded and began to scratch his beard. Yes, basically that's it. But I don't really know where to start, since all I know about them is that one of them had this tag. And before then, I'll have to do a few other things in preparation for traveling. But what about you, Juk? What will you be doing from now on? I'm not sure. I was planning to just see if I can make some friends here and there, and have my beasts rank up a lot. And I hope it won't sound rude, but I was planning on going on my own somewhere. My sleeping pattern will probably not fit well with yours either, so it's better to just split up from here on out. The monkey beast person explained with a complicated smile, and Aizen nodded. I see, I understand what you mean. We'll be basically traveling non-stop for a while, so that really doesn't fit well together. But find me in case you need something. Aizen said and then turned to Bree. I hope that you still want to come with me, and that you won't mind pursuing the shards. It's fine. I would love to help. What those adventurers did is absolutely horrible. She exclaimed and formed her hands into fists angrily. Yeah, I think so as well. Then let's go and get those shards back as soon as possible. Do you have any idea where we could start? Aizen asked her, since she would be the one that might give the best ideas out of the 3 of them. She looked like she was thinking for a while, and then grabbed the iron dog tag that Aizen was holding in his hand. We can ask at Melrose Adventurers Guild. This tag has the adventurer's mana signature, so they might be able to identify it. Although I don't really know if they'll give us a lot of information. Bree suggested. It's better than nothing. We might be able to at least find out where we need to go to have any chance at finding them. Let's go there tomorrow morning, then. I wanted to ask something else as well. But do monsters also only level up through combat, like us? In response to Aizen's question, Bree tilted her head to the side. What are you talking about? People can't only level up through combat. This made both Juk and Aizen respond with a confused look, before Bree started explaining. Well, combat is the easiest way to level up, since you take a small part of the experience of another being into yourself, but you can also get experience by doing things. For example, you can level up through quests. And there are some special actions that give you experience as well. It's not a lot, but better than nothing. So monsters can level up like that too. A little bit easier than people, actually, and they can get a lot of experience through some actions depending on their race. The Fei.Kin explained. As expected of a walking library. Right, that's true. I didn't think of that. So does that mean that Juk and I can level up our tamed beasts without having them fight? Yeah. That's the case. It seems to always be easier to level them up through combat, but for example, I went out to the forest with Tsurishika today and we trained a bit. He's close to ranking up soon, actually. And I've seen a few non-combat monsters before, actually. There weren't many, but every once in a while I saw those that simply ran away from me when I got too close to them. I see. Then Kuria should be able to grow without having to fight, then. Aizen said while holding on to the small myconid in his hands. She should be able to, yeah. Bree exclaimed. And what route do you want her to go? Juk asked curiously. I would definitely want her to stay in an area that befits what she is. Basically, she's a sentient plant, isn't she? So I would like it if I could have her grow and take care of a few different plants and herbs and things like that. Something like that is about the gist of it. In response to Aizen's explanation, Kuria was happily nodding her head. And for that, I guess something like teaching her how to control mana would be a good idea. Maybe she can learn some kind of magic for what I had in mind. So you want her to be a myconid druid? With an excited smile, Bree looked at the tiny figure of the animate mushroom in front of her, before Aizen nodded. A druid is someone that's strongly connected to nature, right? He asked. Amicham. There's more to it than just that, but yeah. I see. Then that should be the area I would like her to go, yeah. But who knows? Maybe she's super talented at something else. I can't make her be a druid if she rather wants to be a sorceress or something like that. But we'll just have to see. Do you two mind if we go ahead and practice for a bit? Aizen asked, and both Juk and Bree told him that they were fine with it. So, Aizen properly sat down on his bed and placed Kuria down in front of him before also grabbing a few mana pills that he then liquefied again and placed in a small bowl. Although Kuria didn't have a mouth, she was still able to absorb liquids simply through her skin. And considering that she had pretty low stats, she would really need the mana potion. But luckily, it seemed as if a magic-oriented path was truly perfect for her, since her INT and WIS stats were 2 to 3 times higher than her other, more physical stats. This made Aizen hope that he could properly communicate the ways to manipulate her mana to her. Alright Kuria, you need to look into yourself and see if you can feel the flow of your mana. It's an energy that you didn't have until today. Can you feel it? Aizen asked, and the small myconid shook her head in response after staying still for a few seconds. Then how about this? I'll pour some mana into you, and then you concentrate on that feeling to see if you can then use it on your own mana, okay? Shortly after this, Aizen placed the tip of his finger on the top of Kuria's head, slowly pouring a tiny bit of his mana into her small body. It seemed like she slightly shuddered at this sudden new feeling, but soon relaxed and took Aizen's mana into herself. After a few seconds, he removed his finger and asked her to repeat trying to find her own mana. And as such, Aizen led her step by step through different tasks that would allow her to use her mana more easily, until he could finally confirm that she got the mana manipulation skill. Great. Now, let's keep practicing for a while, alright? Aizen asked, and Kuria nodded her head excitedly at this new ability that she gained. But it wasn't only Kuria that gained something through this. While they were practicing mana manipulation, Aizen's taming skill ranked up and gave him an extra INT and WIS stat. After a while, they got Kuria's new skill high enough to rank up relatively soon, although for now it was time for everyone to go to sleep. So, they would continue practicing the next day. Announcement. It has been a week since you 5 originals came to the world of magic. Now, it's time for another wave of players to follow behind you. After you, those that helped create the world, are those that helped finance it. They are players chosen directly by our largest investors. In total, 100 players joined you in this world. These players are not called originals like you, but they are called Omegas. 2 more waves in total will follow within 2 weeks, before the world opens up to the general player base in 3 weeks. Enjoy your time. The moment that Eisen opened his eyes after waking up the next morning was this notification. After reading through it, he opened his eyes in surprise but tried to keep his voice down so that Bree wouldn't notice that something was going on. He waved the notification away and smiled. With new players, this world might become more interesting. Eisen just wondered about the story they would go with. Would they also have lost their experience somehow? Or was there some kind of other reasoning for their sudden appearance? Once Juk woke up, he would talk to him about it, and they could keep in contact to talk to each other about what they find out about the Omega players. Eisen was quite interested in how Prime Industries connected the original's appearance with the Omega's appearance. Either way, now Eisen knew that it wasn't only in 3 weeks from now that the players appeared. This world would slowly be filled out with more and more players, and Eisen couldn't wait to see what this would change about this world. The old man stood up and looked at the beds beside him. One of them was empty, and that was the bed that Bree was sleeping in the night before, while Juk was lying on the other one in his wooden state with his beast sleeping tightly in the center of the room. They were even joined by Kuria and Alu for the night, who were lying in the middle of the other beasts. Eisen quietly walked over to his tamed beast and his automaton to get them before exiting the room to look for Bree. And it didn't take long, as soon enough he found her standing in front of the front desk, talking to the innkeeper. The moment that she saw Eisen, she once more began to smile brightly, waved at him. "Good morning, Eisen." She yelled out. With a soft laugh, Eisen walked toward them and greeted her as well as the innkeeper. "I wanted to get to the Adventurers Guild to see what I can find out. Do you want to come with me?" he asked, and Bree quickly nodded her head. "Sure." "Is Juk awake as well?" "No, he's still asleep. I'm guessing that he'll be up soon, though." "Ah, could you tell our friend where we went in case he comes out of our room before we're back?" Eisen asked after turning to the innkeeper. "Ah, of course I will, don't worry about that. See you two later, and have fun at the guild," he said before Eisen and Bree made their way out of inn and toward the Adventurers Guild. It actually didn't take all that long to find this guild, as it was in an area where all different guilds in Melrose settled down. Amongst the buildings lining the stone cliffs were of course the Adventurers Guild, the Merchants Guild, and even the Crafters Guild. Eisen had no idea that the last of these was even a thing. And so, he decided to check out what it was about once he and Bree finished their business at the Adventurers Guild. It may also be a good idea to go to the Merchants Guild as well. After all, Eisen might want to try and sell some of the items he makes in the future, so the Merchants Guild may be able to help him with that. Either way, first, they had to go somewhere else. And that place was the Adventurers Guild.